and good morning. Welcome to a special edition of Now Playing. Eric and I are off this week. We will not have our regular This Week at the Movies. We will be back next Saturday covering a bunch of stuff. But before that happens, I thought I would drop in this week because there are a ton of movies out in the theaters. We had a couple of big wide releases last week. We have a streaming film starring Nicole Kidman, and we have a flood of new movies coming into theaters this week. So let us dive in. The first movie I'm going to touch on is the biggest release from last week and probably the most talked about, though not in the way they would have hoped, and that is Snow White. This is the live action remake. You know, back in 1937, Snow White was one of the first big Disney animated releases. It's a classic that has endured for 88 years and spawned legions of fans. It's part of the fabric of Disney, including its theme parks. But in this wave of reimagining animated films, we're seeing the story brought back to the big screen. This new iteration features Rachel Zegler stepping into the role of Snow White and Gal Gadot as her stepmother, the Evil Queen. We get reimagined versions of some of the classic songs with the addition of new ones. It's all beautifully created to bring this story back to life for the next generation of viewers. We open with Snow White's birth and her childhood, an idyllic time where she learned to appreciate the bounty of the land, the gifts of the people. But when her mother died and her stepmother arrived, things began to change. Her father disappeared. The kingdom changed again. Snow White was relegated to kind of a servant's role as a prisoner of the palace. When she meets a thief named Jonathan, who comes to the castle trying to get food for himself and his friends, she realizes how bad things have become for the people. She tries standing up to the queen, but incurs her wrath instead. That leads the queen to send Snow White out to pick apples with the huntsman, but secretly instructing him to kill her. You know this story. When the huntsman can't kill Snow White, he sends her into the forest. There she meets the dwarves, Jonathan's friends, and begins to dream and plan how she can restore the kingdom once again. This is a timeless tale, and while some of the story is updated and changed for a modern audience, you know, Jonathan is a common man and a thief rather than some prince who's going to come out of nowhere to save her. We still have Snow White, we have the Evil Queen, we have the huntsman, the poisoned apple, the dwarves, we have our happy ending. Director Mark Webb does a nice job of putting all those pieces together. The film has a great fairy tale look. It's a good blend of CGI with the animals and the dwarves, but it works well enough. I thought it worked seamlessly and created some beautiful scenes and some beautiful sequences. They're inviting, and the visuals are a real callback to the animated film. Zegler also does a nice job in the lead role. I thought she was engaging with a powerful voice. I enjoyed the reimagined songs like Whistle While You Work and Hi Ho, but I also appreciated all the new songs. The film is at its best when Zegler is on screen, but the same can't be said for the film's other star. Look, I like Gal Gadot as a performer. She's done some great films. I really loved her as Wonder Woman. We've seen her be engaging, but here the Evil Queen is just two-dimensional at best. There's little life in the character or her sequences, including some of the rougher musical numbers. Even when they're face-to-face, there's just little pop. Overall, this new version of Snow White feels familiar and new at the same time. It's got some good moments. I liked the overall look, but it doesn't feel incredible as either an adaptation or a film. It's a pleasant enough watch. It's good for the whole family. It is now playing nationwide in theaters. I gave it 2.5 stars out of 5. The other high-profile new release from last week was the Alto Nights. You know, sometimes despite having all the right ingredients, a project fails to come together. That's the case with the Alto Nights. The film's written by Nicholas Pileggi, who scripted both Casino and Goodfellas, and it features Robert De Niro in a dual role. It's based on the true story of Frank Costello and Vito Genovese, who grew up together in New York and ended up involved in organized crime. Genovese killed a couple of people, which forced him to flee to Europe. That left control of the organization to Costello, who preferred to keep a lower profile. When Genovese finally returned, delayed by the outbreak of World War II, it was a different kind of New York City, different kind of crime family. His over-the-top methods and violence clashed with the way things operated in his absence. That, combined with Costello's more cool and detached style, creates a rift between the two. Despite their long history and friendship, they clash, and when that clash turns violent, it forces Costello to reconsider his methods to safeguard the future for himself and his wife, played by Deborah Messing. Can he outmaneuver his old friend before it's too late? This is a novel concept that has a decent cast. In addition to De Niro and Messing, the film features Cosmo Jarvis, Michael Rispoli, and Wallace Langham, among others. The period works decently here, too. The film is set in and around 1957, creating a different kind of New York that feels like a strong throwback to films like The Godfather. It's all directed by Barry Levinson, who's given us both classic dramas and classic period pieces. The ingredients are all there. As I mentioned, Pileggi has done some great mob films in the past, and yet this comes out flat as a pancake from the jump. It looks good, it has the right elements, it has potential, but none of that coalesces into something interesting or engaging. The novelty of De Niro in this dual role wears thin very quickly. The back and forth between Costello and Genovese is more cerebral than it should be to pull you in. Even their scenes confronting each other back and forth are just a little boring. We get subplots about congressional investigations and more. None of it feels fully explored. Even the third act, when Costello puts his grand plan in motion, doesn't feel fully fleshed out. Instead, we're left with a well-crafted, nice looking snooze fest. Everyone involved is capable of better. And you know what? You're probably better off not wasting your time or money going to see this in the theaters. Alto Nights is now playing nationwide if you're so inclined. I gave it 2 stars out of 5. Speaking of big stars doing projects, Nicole Kidman seems to be everywhere all the time. She does both small screen TV shows, she does big movies, she does independent films, and now here a streaming film. Her new film, Holland, is out on Prime Video. We get a lot of mystery box shows and movies. What make them work are compelling characters, a quirky world, and a satisfying mystery. But if the film leans too strongly one way or the other, it can tilt it off balance for the entire project. That's sort of the case with Holland, which landed on Prime Video Thursday. The film boasts a cast that includes Kidman, Gael Garcia Bernal, Matthew McFadden, but it's the quirks of the setup that end up distracting from the heart of the story. In the film, we meet Nancy, played by Kidman, a devoted wife, mother, and teacher. She lives a quiet life in Holland, Michigan, with her son, played by Jude Hill, and her husband, Fred, played by McFadden, who is a local optometrist. But he takes a lot of business trips, and when he's gone on one, Nancy begins to suspect something is going on. She shares her suspicions with her friend, a fellow teacher named Dave, played by Bernal. But Dave is reticent to get involved. Eventually, he helps her sneak into her husband's office to find more proof about his affair. But what she finds confirms some of her suspicions and also brings her closer to Dave. They kind of want to be together, but she's afraid to leave her husband and the kind of scandal it might create. But what if he is the cheater that got outed? So Nancy and Dave track Fred to a conference, determined to get their proof. Nancy has to head back early, but Dave keeps following him to uncover that proof. But what Dave finds and what Nancy discovers when she digs deeper at home turns the whole situation on its head. And, it's meant to be kind of mysterious. The film comes from a script from Andrew Sodorowski, who worked on the series Manhunt. I actually kind of really enjoyed that series for Apple TV Plus. There's some potential in this premise with some interesting twists and turns, but the problem is it takes a really long time to get there. And by the time we get there, the whole thing kind of flames out. The third act should have been tense and dramatic, but it feels awkward and a bit boring. The performances here are fine, but it's really not enough of a hook for a story that takes too long to get where it's going. In addition, the film seems way too focused on sort of the quirky nature of this town, Holland, Michigan, which is obsessed with Dutch culture owing to its name. There's festivals, there's special breakfasts at church, there's small-minded small town folks, there's Fred's obsession with miniature train set. All of it feels like a distraction that kind of slows the pace of the film. I like the potential of the story. It might have been better if it was a tight 90 minutes, especially with this cast, but the execution of the story just leaves a lot to be desired. Holland is now on Prime Video. Like the Alto Nights, I'm only giving this one 2 stars out of 5. Let's turn to a trio of films that are opening in theaters this weekend. The first one is a smaller release. It's in more limited release, so it may not be playing in every theater where you live. It is called Bob Trevino Likes It. There's the family that we are born into and the family we choose or often find. There's a distinction that lies at the heart of this new movie, Bob Trevino Likes It, which comes from Tracy Lehman. It's an interesting and at times emotional film. All that makes sense once you reach the end dedication. It centers on Lily, played by Barbie Furia, a lonely caregiver who has just endured a breakup. When we meet her, Her father, Bob, played by French Stewart, isn't much help. He's also not much support. He's very focused on his own life, his own needs, and how his daughter can help him. After Lily can't help him retain his latest girlfriend, Bob shuts her out. He won't see her. He won't return her calls. He leaves Lily isolated and feeling alone. In that isolation, she turns to Facebook. There, she finds a Bob Trevino. She sends a friend request, but this Bob, played by John Leguizamo, isn't her father and turns out isn't a relation. But he has his own bouts of loneliness, and he sees in Lily someone who needs a friend. He accepts the request, and the two begin communicating via Facebook. Eventually, that leads to an in-person meeting. His Bob's wife, played by Rachel Bay Jones, is skeptical, but he meets Lily. They hit it off, and in Bob, Lily finds a father figure she never had. In Lily, Bob finds a friend and a mentee that fills a hole left by the death of his own child. Together, they find in each other a companion and someone with whom to share the struggles of life. This is a simple and a sweet premise. Um, it's like that all the way through, but it takes a turn in the third act that I think really taps into a beautiful emotional core. Finding out the ways this story is drawn from personal experience by Layman makes the third act hit even harder. Again, you have to stay for the end dedication, and even though it's already a very emotional third act, I think that really cements it and hits home, knowing how personal this project was. It works because of the bond between Feria and Leguizamo. Both of them serve as producers on the film, feel invested in this as a final product. It works best when they're playing off each other, and their connection proves vital to that third act twist. I like the cast here. I like the emotional depth of the ending. Some of the beginning and the middle is a little slow to develop, but give it a chance. This film will work its way into your heart and leave you quite moved by the end. Bob Trevino likes it. Opens in limited release today. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. Our next film, another smaller, more independent film that is also another very emotional journey, and that is The Penguin Listens. This one also based on a true story. Animals have a powerful ability to impact us and our lives. These animals provide companionship, a listening ear, and friendship when we need it, and often when we're at our lowest. These friendships can often come when we least expect them. That was the case for Tom Mitchell, played here by Steve Coogan. He came to Argentina in 1976 as a means of escape. He'd suffered a loss that had him kind of going through the motions of life, and it seemed like a fine place to disappear from the world. He was there to teach English. When unrest led to an unexpected break from teaching, he used the time to visit Uruguay. There, on the beach, amid an oil spill, his life was changed. He found a penguin covered in oil, barely alive. Reluctantly, he took it home and cleaned it up. When he tried to return it to the sea, it just wouldn't leave his side. When he tried to give it away to the authorities, they told him, go ahead and keep it. When he tried to bring it to a zoo, instead, it became his faithful companion. The penguin not only provided companionship, but it also provided a gateway to a more full life. It helped him to connect with colleagues, to explore the city, to more effectively reach his students. More importantly, it helped him to open up and move on for the first time since the events that had caused him to cut off his own life experiences. This new film, which opens today, is based on a true story and Mitchell's own experience, which he later turned into a memoir of the same name. His time was spent with a penguin who he named Juan Salvador. That time was short, but it was incredibly impactful for his life and for those he knew. The film was written by Jeff Pope, who scripted Coogan and the film Philomena, directed by Peter Cattaneo, who's worked on a number of feel-good films based on true stories. They combine well here with Coogan to tell an engaging and powerful story. I really liked Coogan in this lead role. He has the right amount of pathos to make this film work well. He plays off the penguin and the other actors, creating just a memorable and engaging story. It's a simple film, but it is very heartwarming and a great time at the theaters. As I mentioned, it opens today. This is the film of the ones I'm going to talk about today that I like the best. I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. It might not be the most high profile release this week, but it was certainly worth the investment. Lastly, we're going to talk about a more wide release, and that is the new horror film from Blumhouse, Woman in the Yard. You know, there are a lot of elements that go into making a successful horror movie. When they all come together and hit just right, it can be gripping and engaging. But when even one of those things is off, it can be a real slog. Unfortunately, that is the case with The Woman in the Yard, the new horror thriller that opens today. There are a lot of things going for it, but it doesn't all come together, and that makes for a rough watch despite just an 88-minute runtime. Quickly, we're introduced to Ramona, played by Danielle Deadweiler, who is a woman in mourning. Her husband, David, played by Russell Hornsby, has recently died. She's having trouble letting go. That makes it tough for her and her children. Taylor, played by Peyton Jackson, and Annie, played by Estella Kahani. They live on a farm. They're isolated out in the country. The power's out. Their phones are dead. That leaves them kind of isolated and alone, which doesn't really matter until they spot a gothic woman in the yard. But she isn't what she first appears to be. Can they figure out how to placate this woman before she leads to their undoing? Look, the setup here works just fine. We have an isolated location, a family in the mid of grief, and a tight cast setup. I also like the look of the woman and the performance there, which was menacing. Yeah, Daniel Deadweiler is a good actress too. She pours great effort in, and there are some interesting pieces to this mystery, and she has some good scenes. But unfortunately, the story is just too thin here. Our director, Jamais Colette Serra, adds some nice tension through visual flourishes, but can't escape a story that the third act in particular just doesn't work. This film feels dull despite its tight runtime. And the ending to me felt like an incredible letdown, though I guess I was relieved when it was over. There are pieces that work, but the whole film just doesn't come together. It was a lot for me. The Woman in the Yard opens in wide release today. I'm giving it just 1.5 stars out of 5. I did not enjoy this experience. Well, that's a look at a few of the films that you can choose from this week, whether you want to go to the theater or whether you want to stream something at home. Hope that gives you some insight. Before I get out of here, I want to give you two things that I really did enjoy that came out this week on Apple TV Plus. The first is the new series, The Studio. This one from Seth Rogen, starring Seth Rogen and Ike Barinholtz and Catherine Hahn, among others. Tons of guest star performances. This focuses on the head of a smaller studio as he goes through the process of trying to make movies. The first 2 episodes dropped and streamed on Wednesday. Subsequent episodes drop weekly. It is a 10-episode first season. I have seen the whole thing. I love this. This is one of my top 5 shows of the year so far. I thought this was incredible. It was a lot of fun. There are a lot of funny moments. There are some incredible cameos, a great star-studded group of people that come through and inhabit this world. Rogen is great in the lead role. I like Ike Barinholtz here a lot too. I like Catherine Hahn. This was a great surprise. So if you're looking for a series to sink into, pilot was 45 minutes. Episodes are mostly right around a half hour after that, including the second episode, which also dropped, which is called The Oneer, and was hysterical. Catherine O'Hara is also one of the main actors in here. There's just a great chemistry. I enjoyed this series a lot. The other thing that dropped on Apple, comes out today, is a 2-part documentary series called Number One on the Call Sheet. The first half looks at African-American male actors and the role they've had in Hollywood. The second part looking at female actresses and the role that they've had in Hollywood throughout the years, kind of chronicling the struggles, their successes, and the story behind the scenes. Each part is about an hour and a half. It is produced by companies run by Jamie Foxx and Kevin Hart, both of whom appear in the first half when we're looking at the men's side of the equation. Some great interviews, some great stories, a great look at the industry. I was deeply moved by both halves of this documentary. I think this is well worth checking out. This was one of my favorite kind of film experiences of the year, and it's at home. It's considered like a mini series, but it's really just a pair of complementary films that I thought were great and deeply moving. Everybody should check them out. And it was just a great experience. I don't know what else to say about that. Well, that'll wrap things up for me this week. As I mentioned, Eric and I will be back next Saturday morning. We'll be looking at a whole bunch of things, including some more Daredevil Reborn. There were 2 episodes that came out this week, some pretty good episodes. Hope you got a chance to check that out. We will talk about all 3 of the new episodes that will have aired by the time we are back together next week, and we'll be looking at some other movies that are coming out. And you can keep up with everything I'm following by following me on Letterboxd at Nighthawk7734. So go ahead and follow me there. And you can also go ahead and check out all the things that I'm writing on the Music City Drive-In. I have long form reviews of all of these films. We'll be adding a couple more this weekend, as well as some other stuff. So feel free to go check that out. Be sure to follow us and be sure to check out the other podcasts on the network, like the Love and Reality podcast. You may even see me popping up there from time to time with Ricky as we march our way through Vanderpump Rules from the beginning. That is quite something to take in if you want to watch us go back and forth, reliving. Right now, we're reliving 2013. It's been a good time. So that'll do it for me today. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next Saturday for a regular episode of This Week at the Movies.